Olá, seja bem-vindo. Nós vamos ter uma conversa hoje com o John e a Pam Dysinger. Vamos estar conversando sobre como eles educaram os filhos deles e envolveram a agricultura no processo. Hoje eles vivem em uma fazenda, eles cultivam uma variedade de produtos e os filhos cresceram nessa fazenda. E muitas pessoas às vezes nos perguntam, mas como eu posso envolver os meus filhos, no plantio, no cultivo? E como que eu posso educá-los através dessa experiência? É sobre isso que nós vamos estar conversando, então, com eles. So, our first question is, how have you raised your children and involved them in agriculture? What are some activities that you did? Something like that.
I wish we had a picture of the first year we started farming. Our oldest three children were 2, 4, and 6, basically. So they've pretty much grown up in the garden on the farm.
Yeah. So we've involved them in every aspect of agriculture. So as soon as they were big enough to stand on a chair, they were sifting compost or peat moss.
And I think that's, there are many home businesses that a family can do. And of course, we're not saying agriculture is the only one, but we think one of the beauties of agriculture is that there is a job for every age. Mm-hmm. From a 2-year-old who can carry, a little hand plant, transplant shovel, to a 90-year-old who can sit and help us seed or something. So literally, there's something for every skill and age level.
And we would try to make it fun. So we would get maybe little dump trucks. We have 4 boys and 1 girl. They all enjoyed the dump trucks. And if we were taking rocks out of a bed, we would tell them to bring their trucks, and they would line them up, and we would put the rocks in their trucks, and they would go and put it on the pile. So I think trying to make work enjoyable. And did it take longer? Yes. Maybe they could have gotten more done if they'd just taken them with their hands, but it made work fun for them. And so they didn't even think of it as work. It was just play.
And when they were very young, about how long were they outside helping you?
Oh, when they were very young, they were outside most of the day, every day. Yeah.
And you have to pace it. You say, okay, this job, we need to weed to this point, and then you can have a break for 15 minutes. Mm-hmm. So, the older they get, obviously, the longer they can work, but you have to make it something that they can conquer. Otherwise, they get discouraged and overwhelmed.
And it's not that they worked all the time, because they had chores in the house. From the time they were, again, big enough to stand on a chair, they were putting the clothes into the laundry, or, helping with chores. So they had indoor work and they had outdoor work, but they spent a lot of time in creative play. We really believe that just for children to just be in nature is very beneficial.
And were you outside with them as a mother? How did you manage?
I often was, but we were intentional, at my sink, I looked outside and we had put a sandbox right there. So they would play outside the window. And so I wasn't always physically with them, but I was often, especially when they were little, just in earshot. Yeah.
But in the gardening projects, were you usually, or more the father?
I mean,
both?
We were both. Yeah, we were both involved.
And you know, the thing with agriculture is the workload varies through the seasons. So rather than them having, you know, summer break or spring break, they had strawberry break, you know, when it was time to pick strawberries. And then in the fall, when we were planting strawberries, that was another time when they were, you know, they were full-time on the farm for maybe a week or two. But then after the strawberries were planted, then there was time for them to do more of the schoolwork. So it ebbed and flowed with the seasons.
And then once they started school, how did you manage?
Well,
Book work and garden work?
it was a challenge. I will be honest. It was a big challenge because let me say this. Because of my teaching background, I had this idea of what school looked like. And it included desks and workbooks and textbooks and everything. In my mind, I was just taking school and bringing it home. And I really did not understand about what education really was. And so, unfortunately, I feel like I kind of didn't embrace the education that the farm gave. I look at my children and I think they've had an amazing education with the work on the farm, and then the book work that we did, and the life experiences. But how did I balance it? Every time I was determined, okay, today we're doing school, and my husband would come and say, honey, I really need you, and I really need the kids, and I'd be, oh, no, and I would just
Not
resist
every
it.
time.
No, I'm just saying it was a reoccurring event. A time or two. No, it was a reoccurring event. So, but the thing is that, you know, Raymond Moore talks about the education being balanced, and I think that not because I planned it, but because God kind of forced it on us, we had more balance. Yeah, there were many times where we just had to go and help on the farm, and I kept their education very basic. I focused on reading, writing, and arithmetic, and then everything else, we just tried to make life full of learning experiences. So we never did vocabulary, but every time a word that was unfamiliar to them was used, my husband was giving them the definition or looking it up in the dictionary. So, you know, we always had a map right on the wall. So if we talked about some part of the world, like Brazil, we'd go and look at the map, and we would look at, oh, okay, it has, you know, these big cities or these many states. So we just tried to follow. I wish I had the quote in front of me, but in education, there's a quote about Jesus, his education. Are you familiar with it? It lists 4 things. His education was God appointed. I thought that's so interesting. It's a God appointed, and it was the Bible, nature, life experiences, and useful work. Those 4 things. And so we have a lot of that.
And, you know, we always like to make the disclaimer that we're not claiming that we did it perfectly. No. You know, you can talk to our children and they will be honest with you, you know. But, yeah,
It
we
worked.
just...
It worked.
We knew God had called us to a certain life, and we did the best we knew at the time, and any lack in their education was our fault and not the Lord's, you know. But just growing up on a farm builds so much self-confidence in people, in young people. And I think I'm getting ahead of your questions maybe, but
It's tying into my next question.
so maybe go
What were the
ahead.
benefits, like I'm sure physical benefits they had many, but mental and spiritual benefits of that lifestyle?
Well, let me just add in that I think that I always second guessed, and I always felt like I myself felt insecure about their education, and I think a lot of homeschool moms struggle with that. They feel insecure, their children feel insecure, and I think that part of the reason is because we just don't see education as God sees education. And I think we're so influenced by the world. I was so influenced by my own education that I felt insecure about the education I was giving to my children. But as I've seen them become adults, and I've seen the work ethic, the abilities, it's just given me confidence that God's ways are the best ways. And I love, and I often have shared this, Bezalel. Do you know about Bezalel? From the Old Testament, Bezalel was the one that God appointed to do all the artistry, all the crafting of the temple, the wilderness temple. And the Bible is very clear that God gave him the ability. And so I've always just felt like whatever God called my children to, he would give them the ability. If I had failed them, if I hadn't given them what they needed, because we tried to connect them with him. So I think when your children can connect with the Lord, he can empower them and give them whatever skills they need for whatever calling he gives them.
So I think one of the biggest things that they gained is common sense. You know, we live in an age where common sense is pretty uncommon, and I admit, you know, that I grew up very much in the books and did not have a lot of practical experience growing up. And my boys at a very young age could outthink me on how to solve problems on the farm.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I'd be trying to do come up with all these complicated solutions, and they'd say, well, why don't you just do this? I'm like, oh yeah, that would work. Good idea.
Tell them about the time you and Jonathan were working with that peat moss. Do you remember that?
No.
So I'll tell it. He doesn't remember it, but this is just an example. Jonathan was little, maybe 8 or something, and they were in the greenhouse, and they had a big bale like this of peat moss, and John could not find a knife to cut the top off, and he was looking all around for something, and there was a pruning, like a tree pruning saw. So while John's looking for the perfect tool, the knife or the scissors, Jonathan just took the saw and cut the top right off the bag. And I was like, oh, I guess that's a good way to do it. So just, you know, quick thinking
So
and
common
practical
sense,
common sense.
and then to me the other thing was, as I kind of alluded to earlier, was just feeling confident that, yeah, I can do this. You know, whereas when you don't grow up doing practical things, there's this fear barrier. You know, for me to take an engine apart, you know, that's kind of over the top for me. But my boys, oh yeah, I think I could do this, you know, and they just plunge in. And so just that, yeah, taking away the fear, yeah, I can do it, you know. And of course you don't want them to get too self-confident, but I think that kind of confidence is a good kind of confidence, that they're willing to tackle whatever comes. You know, welding, mechanics, carpentry. You know, one of our sons is renovating a house right now, and another one's getting ready to build a house, and they're not thinking about somebody else doing it. They're just, you know.
How about spiritually? What were the influences there?
You know, I think one thing that we struggled with, I'll just be honest, is that, you know, sometimes when young people go to school and to a school where maybe they're positively influenced spiritually, there can I mean, I can remember kind of us talking about the fact that, wow, it just doesn't seem like maybe our children are as spiritual or as, you know, but I think that the thing that, we can never judge someone's spirituality, I think that's for sure. But I think as parents, what we've realized is that the growth that happens in the home setting spiritually is slower, but it is maybe deeper or more solid. It's just, you know, I mean, I don't know, it's hard to talk about your own children's spirituality, but I would just say this, that we feel very blessed that we have 5 children who love the Lord, who love us, who are active members in the church, and who want to serve the Lord. And we praise Him. We don't take any credit. That's not because of us. It's because God is faithful when we do our part. And so, you know, I think sometimes as parents we expect to see the fruit early. And sometimes the fruit ripens slowly. And we have to just trust that if you put them in the right environment, which is nature, God is going to speak to them, whether I mean, Mrs. White says it's imperceptible. The changes that happen to us when we are in nature are imperceptible. But by faith, we know they're happening. And so, you have to be patient, like the farmer has to be patient for the fruit.
And I think something that ties into spirituality, maybe not directly, but indirectly, is the whole issue of peer pressure. You know, in other words, we've seen situations and environments where, you know, a group of young people come together and, you know, it's the right thing to do to look a certain way and act a certain way, you know, and it looks good from the outside, but our children were not necessarily, you know, they didn't want to put anything on. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. They were who they were, and they were comfortable with that, and they were not influenced one way or other. You know, in other words, if it was a group that was, you know, spiritual, they weren't trying to look super spiritual. But if it was a group that was rowdy, party, whatever, they weren't going to go that way either. So I think, again, it comes back to feeling comfortable with who they were and recognizing that, you know, this is where I am, and I'm not going to try to pretend to be somebody I'm not.
And that's not to say that they didn't have spiritual struggles. I mean, I think we all have spiritual struggles. And, you know, not to say that when they got into their teens, you know, they did everything that they would look back on and say, oh, you know, I mean, I think that the Lord taught us a lot of things as our children went through their teens and their 20s about how to release them to the Lord and to his care and his keeping, and recognize that we as parents do our part, but if we don't release them and let them go and start to learn to walk with the Lord themselves, then often they don't want to walk with the Lord.
We're handicapped.
We handicap them and we push them away. So it's a life journey, isn't it? You know, but we are very blessed.
Now, what were some projects that they developed that were tied to agriculture, like industry projects?
So we did a lot of small businesses.
Yeah.
So
I was just thinking recently about our, 2003, when we really had a big push and developed the farm, and we had a little farm store, and I remember our boys making these little rubber band powered paddle wheels, boats with paddle wheels. And so they were selling those boats. You just wound the rubber band up and then the paddle wheel would go. So they were what?
they were 7 and 9.
Is that right?
That was the summer. That was the spring Caleb was born.
So that was a little thing, but Kirsten made granola to sell in our farm store, and Jonathan made cookies. But then as far as farm things, those weren't directly farm things.
Did they ever grow their own crop to sell and things like that?
Yeah.
The boys grew sweet corn one summer.
They grew it 2 summers.
Okay.
Right? So
Yeah, we laughed because it was not.
it's a disaster. So the boys wanted to grow some sweet corn, and we didn't have any dogs at that point, and we were kind of caretaking for for some friends of ours who had a couple of dogs, and
Dog sitting.
we were dog sitting. That's right. Okay, so the corn got to be just the right.
And
It was getting right.
They worked hard. They kept
They
it
worked very
cultivated, and they were doing a good job.
They were about 12 and 14, I think, when this happened, and the corn was just getting ripe, and the raccoons discovered that the corn was getting ripe, and so the boys decided they would sleep out there by the field to protect their corn.
Oh, we encouraged.
We encouraged it. I'm sure it's good memories. They slept, and the dogs slept. And the raccoons made off with the corn. And that was really hard for us. I'll be honest, as parents, we really felt so bad because there was no laughing at that point. It was much more like tears because they had worked so hard. And we were so disappointed for them that we started looking for solutions. And we found a breed of dog that we felt like could take on the wildlife of our farm. And so by the next year, I think we had one of those dogs, and I think the boys might have done corn once more, but it was maybe a little more successful, but I don't really remember it being successful.
You learn through those failures as well as the successes, and learn to just kind of, life doesn't always turn out how you want it to. And so even though from a monetary standpoint it was, I guess, a failure, they sold. They had a few dozen years to sell.
I think we bought them.
Oh, I remember some people buying them. From a monetary point of view, it may not have worked out well, but from a character point of view, I think it was a good experience.
Now, Ellen White talks about the child having a little garden for
Of their
themselves.
own.
Did you do that, or did you just involve them in the whole, the entire farm process?
I remember that we did that before we started a garden, before we started farming.
Okay.
When we just had a garden, they each had their own little plots. But I think that's one thing I would do differently if I was going to start over. And I think I would try to give them a little bit more ownership in maybe a certain aspect of growing.
They did, we assigned like strawberry rows. This is your row, you're responsible for weeding it, for picking it, for taking care of it, kind of thing. But yeah, as far as actual crops, trying to think, I'm pretty sure we did some of that, but I can't think of any specific examples. Now, they're pretty well grown, but our youngest son, Caleb, he's in charge of microgreens, and that's his thing. I haven't done anything. Well, I've helped him carry some trays, I guess.
And how old is he now?
He's 17.
So he's still interested in farming?
Oh yeah, he's
That's his life.
he's planning to be a farmer.
Yeah.
So, of our 4 boys, our oldest runs Farmer's Friend, which is a company that manufactures and sells tools for small farmers like we. And our daughter and her husband work for him. So our oldest 2 children are involved in farming indirectly through Farmer's Friend. It's pretty directly, but they're not actually in the dirt.
Except that they have their own gardens.
Yeah, they all have their own. And then our second son works full-time
And
on
his
the
wife.
farm. And his wife.
He and his wife farm with us.
And then our third son is really the only one that's not directly involved with farming, but he's doing an electrical apprenticeship, so he's still hands-on, and then our youngest son is definitely anxious to finish his schooling so he can be on the farm full-time.
Now, I heard about your oldest son experience developing some tools or machinery for agriculture. Could you tell us how it started?
That's a long story, but we try to make it short. How much do we play?
Yeah, so, well, I think it's on his website, the story,
I think we should just tell this simply, that Jonathan was always mechanical. He was always trying to help us find the fastest way to do things. And you know, as a parent, the fastest way can sometimes be the slowest way, because it takes so long to figure out the fastest way that you could have had it done. So there was some of that. But when he was 16, he started a small engine shop, and he was doing that.
Yeah, I think it was when he was 15. I guess we can just say the Lord orchestrated it all, we believe, but we ended up, he and I and my brother and his son, up in Maine visiting Elliot Coleman, who in the small farm world, he's kind of considered the father or grandfather of the market gardening movement. And so the Lord worked that all out. It's amazing the way it happened. But while we were there, Elliot Coleman, we were talking after dinner, and he was talking, he's full of ideas for tools and stuff, and he said, "You young guys need to come up with a solution for harvesting baby greens. You know, because at that point there was nothing other than big tractor-powered harvesters, which were, you know, $20,000 or something. And so John,
down to scissors. It was just
Yeah.
scissors or a knife, or $10,000 machine. There was nothing between.
So Jonathan came home and started tinkering and coming up with different prototypes, and he had some good ideas, but you know, there's a big jump from an idea to an actual working prototype. And another amazing thing was that the Lord brought to us an Adventist engineer, mechanical engineer, who had an interest in gardening. And we said, would you be interested in helping our son come up with a working model here? And he agreed, and he was amazing. He was a retired or semi-retired engineer. He took Jonathan from crude prototypes and drawings to an actual working model that we were able to take back up to Elliot Coleman's place and demonstrate it for him, and he was so excited. And that was the beginning.
Of his business now, right?
Yeah. And his business is just exploding. With COVID, you know, all small-scale agriculture has gone through the roof. There's such a demand.
So at 19, he started his business, really. He's 27. And the business is quite large. You know, really, I always tell him, I just like to see, to God be the glory, right on the front of the building, because it's amazing what the Lord has done in these few years with his business.
Now, one question that people might be thinking, did he ever go to college?
No, he didn't. But he has hired a lot of people who have. But, you know, I think, again, it comes back. Well, he was telling me recently, oh, Mom, I really should have done trigonometry. I mean, the things that he has learned in this business, you know, from milling, you know, they're milling all their own parts.
Well,
to
on you know, CNC mills, which are, you know, totally computerized, very, very
you
high
know,
tech.
writing all the programs for them, and I'm saying, how did you figure, how do you know how to do this? You know, just, anyway, when he was telling me, oh, I should have done more advanced math, I just, really? No. Now you need it, and you can learn it quickly when you can put it to use. But the problem with so much of our learning is that the books are very separate from real life. And so even when you learn it in the books, because you're not applying it to real life, you don't retain it, you know? And so, I mean, when he needed to learn codes for programming, you know, the Lord brought somebody into his, or he hired somebody to teach him. But then he went and studied, and he, you know, so no, but here's the thing that's very interesting. You just think about successful businesses. I was just reading one of the most famous, he's probably not famous today, but a book that we read, his name is R.G. Letourneau. Now, I probably slaughtered that. He's French, but the name is French. But he was a businessman from America, a Christian businessman, who built one of the largest businesses for earth moving, building roads in America. He was very, very wealthy. But God owned his business. And he lived on 10%, and he gave away 90%. I was just looking at, he had a 7th grade education.
Wow.
You know, there's something about the mind of an inventor and a creative person, and you see that over and over again, where business people who have been very successful, you look back at their education and the world would say it was lacking, or the world would say, well, they had this problem or this disorder or this, you know, they needed to be on this medication. But I just want to encourage moms, if you have a child that seems out of the box, let them be out of the box. Don't try to just cram them in and make them fit the mold, because you just think of so many great men. I mean, Albert Einstein, you know.
Well, I think he had a college education, but you're saying just he was out of the box.
Yeah, Thomas Edison.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I mean, there's just lots of people. And even today,
Steve Jobs.
You know, there are a lot of people who don't have what the world considers an education, but they're men and women who have educated themselves, and their education is broad. And so,
And to finish, how do you tie mission into all of this?
that's the most important thing, isn't it?
Well, to me, again, that's one of the beauties of agriculture, is we like to say we get paid, our customers pay us to evangelize them. So you can't beat that.
Yeah.
You know, we work the cities from our country outposts twice a week in the summers, you know. So we have, with our children, we have just tried to make missions part of their life. You know, when strawberry season starts in the spring, we never eat the first berries, because those are first fruits for the Lord. So our first picking goes to our neighbors. We go around the neighborhood and we give them strawberries, and you know, try to include a little sharing book or blow tract or something. And then, you know, actual missions, we did a couple missions to Honduras that, the first one was for 10 days or something, but then we took a sabbatical, which you can't do very easily unless you own your own business. And
A whole year?
well, the first time was 3 months, but then the second time was a whole year. And so we went to Honduras for 3 months, and that was, I think our children probably would all say that that was one of the highlights of their childhood. Just living in a little mountain village in Honduras, it was amazing.
And were you involved in agriculture?
In Honduras?
In Honduras?
We'd help with the mission.
There was a mission, a small mission right near where we were, and we helped in the garden there, but not officially.
Mm-hmm.
It was just because we wanted to get outdoor exercise and we wanted to be a blessing.
But I think what John said is really the key, is that missions should just be the way we live. You know, everything that we do, we should be thinking about our influence, and we should be thinking about, how to bless. We could tell you many, many stories about interactions with our customers and how we're able to share the gospel and to be friends. A ministry of healing, Christ's method alone brings true success, and he mingled with the people and he met their needs, and then he bade them follow me. And so, I think agriculture is the perfect, way to follow that model. But then, like with Jonathan's business, they send blow tracts with every package. They send thousands of glow tracts out a year. And, you know, not everybody appreciates it. Their website's closed on Sabbath, and it has a nice message there about the Sabbath. And so, you know, they've had a lot of comments. Not everybody appreciates it, but people respect it. And so I think, you know, again, it's easy for us to look at our life and say, well, we can't tell you we have these baptisms, but by faith, we believe that the Lord says, you plant the seed, you water it, you do, but I'm going to bring the fruit. And we believe that of all of our friendship evangelism, that there will be fruit.
Final advice for families who are struggling to include agriculture in their children's education?
I think my advice would be to just study for yourself and make sure you understand why it's important. You know, in other words, don't do it because somebody else said you should, you know, but I mean, for us, we were studying the Bible in the spirit of prophecy, and we came under conviction. You know, Mrs. White says, no devising of man has ever improved upon God's plan of agriculture for the children of Israel. And so when you start coming under those convictions, it's not a matter of should I do it, but how do I do it? And so, you know, make sure you're doing it because you're convicted that this is God's way. And then once you have that conviction, you know, He's going to guide you. He's going to give you ideas. But certainly there's plenty of resources out there now. You know, there's so much good information out there. Actually, Ad Agra is coming up. They hope to have it finished by this summer, right? Yeah, an educational curriculum.
For English.
For high school and for elementary. Just, you know, take the book into the garden kind of thing with journaling and everything. I think it's going to be very helpful for schools and homeschools.
So I think, you know, you have to move by principle. And we have really tried to live our lives by principle. You know, what are the principles that we should live by? And one of God's plans for families is that they should have a garden. And so we just feel like it's not optional. God wants us to be gardening. He wants us. Now, if you find yourself where you don't have a country property, then you have to start where you are. You know, you can do something small. But God really wants to work with our characters, and it happens very well, maybe best, in the garden.
Well, thank you so much.
Thank you.
For sharing, and may God continue to bless you and your family.
Thank you.
May He bless your ministry.